The
illustrious Jabba bids you welcome. I'm going to regret this.
I'm Pete Mitchell. He's Peyton Jones. And this is the Church Planter Podcast, brought to you by Church Planter Magazine. Welcome to the Thriving Christian Business Podcast, the show that's dedicated to helping Christian business owners honor God while growing their business and profits through influencing the marketplace in such a way others are drawn to Christ by the example they reflect as they interact with their employees, vendors, and clients to grow the kingdom. Now, if you're ready for some inspiration, some encouragement, some proven business building strategies, and a couple of new ideas that you can take your business to the next level and beyond with, listen to this episode. If you're ready to grow your business faster, go to tcbsolution.com. And now, broadcasting from the Thriving Christian Business Podcast studio, it's Pete Mitchell and Dave Negri. Hey, Church Planter, this is Pete Mitchell.
And this is Peyton Jones.
And you have magically tuned in for what is promising to be the best episode of the podcast yet. Mainly because I have no idea what we're talking about, so it's got to be good.
Get on board, step inside, going for a magic ride, going to the other side where only rainbows hide. On the great Church Planter Podcast. Whoa, great Space Coaster.
You know,
80s?
That might be a violation. That might be a copyright violation. I'm not 100% sure on that.
Yeah, probably. I wonder. I don't know those rules. We were just talking about that because I want to make a new intro for this podcast.
Yeah.
And I want to use a real song.
We had somebody on who's like, yeah, your intro, that's my music. We put it out there as copyright, free music. Yeah, you don't know that? Somebody we had, he was like, yeah, that's our music from our band.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I think it was
hardcore church planting. We had a punk band. What was the name of that? Combat Junkies.
Is that who it was?
Punk band. Yeah, that was great. I actually used to fly out to Virginia and North Carolina and hang out with those guys. So I actually asked them, like, hey, can I use your? And they said,
I bought it off of a site. That's
Are you talking about for this podcast or that podcast?
Both of them. I did not use anything you gave me. I bought it off of a royalty-free music site.
Interesting.
Remember, I was the one who was financially supporting this great mission of ours.
That is true. Until there's an amazing book, and I'm going to drop it right now, even though this is smack talk. It is called Gospel Patrons. It's in my new book. Did you know? Cha-ching! Did you know I'm writing a textbook, Pete? It's in there.
You're writing a book?
I'm writing a textbook. And by the way, I just wrote a blog and I put, hey, when I was did I tell you I was writing a textbook? And then in parentheses, I put, sorry, it's an inside joke for the Church Planter Podcast. But
I like how you're promoting the Church Planter Podcast.
Absolutely. I'm starting to become cross-promotion boy after 10 years. I'm kind of figuring out that maybe I ought to promote. I've never been a promotion guy. And I think that's maybe one of the reasons why people like our show, because we're not.
Maybe it's one of the reasons it doesn't really grow.
Do people like, that assumes that people do like our show. That might be a problem.
People like our show only because we will make fun of them if they give us anything less than 5-star reviews.
That is true. Try us. So, of course, we don't even look at our reviews anymore, but if we see it, dang it. So real quick, I was going to say Gospel Patrons, an amazing book where the guy traces every time the gospel spread and he raised up someone like a Wesley or a Wycliffe or someone like that. He always raised someone up like a Pete Mitchell. So this podcast, just yet another example of a gospel patron. That's all I'm saying. So I'm a Pete Mitchell shill.
My
sugar daddy.
Yeah. Once upon a time. No more sugar daddy.
I'm cutting you
You're
off.
my skinny friend, and I'm your rich friend now. That's
I'm
how
not
this
that
works.
skinny. Oh, today was shoulder day.
I'm not
baby.
that rich.
I'm loving getting back in the gym, baby.
Wow.
Loving it.
I knew you were into guns, but I did not know how.
You gotta have tickets if you're gonna go to the gun show.
Do you have a license to carry those guns, sir?
I do, actually. Thanks for asking.
This is getting a little uncomfortable in here. Shh, but tell me, Pete, you like hugging now? Tell us all about that.
Yeah, that was hilarious. So my pastor, like, I walk into church on Sunday and he's like going to do the arm bump, and I go, "Oh, you're either shaking my hand or you get nothing," right? And he goes, "Well, how about a hug?" And I'm like, "Yes!" Like this big old bear hug. And so he texts me, I think it was yesterday, and he's like, "Hey, I forgot to say thanks for the hug." And I'm like, "Hey, when the state tells me I can't do something, watch out. It's about to get real up in here."
Oh, I know. You know what you can't do that they're saying is illegal?
Give money
is giving
New
a
Breed.
large check to New Breed, Pete. Gavin Newsom has said New Breed is not legal anymore. Hey, funny enough, I got a surgery. I don't get surgeries. I don't go to the doctor. And the reason I don't go to the
That's
doctor.
not the guy we hear banging in the background. He's not the one who cut you open, right?
No, but I was starting to tell you this. There was a student there, and I'm like, go ahead and let the student stitch me up, because I was a student once, and I had to do stuff. I'll never forget the first time I gave an old lady a shot. Very first time I gave anything other than an orange a shot. She was in her bed, lying on her side, and I had to give her a shot in the butt, which you got to be careful you don't hit the sciatic nerves. There's a certain way to make sure. Anyways, I give her the jab because it's a jab, your intramuscular shot. And she arches her back in pain and goes, "Oh, he hit the bone." And oh my gosh, dude.
Did you really?
And my nursing instructor sees the horror on my face and just reaches her hand out and says, "You didn't." And obviously this lady had a bit of dementia. And but it terrified me.
It would have been better if she didn't have dementia, but she was just doing that to you.
Oh my gosh. Well, so when I got in there, because I've had chest bursting aliens apparently growing in me. They say they might be lipomas. Most likely are, but they're going to send them off to check them out. But I don't have cancer or anything. So anyways, they the ladies in there.
They're going to come back and say you got like 3.5 months to live.
I know, right? I know, but think what that would do for book sales. Church plantology.
All I know is I know what I get to draw on your face at the funeral.
We did have that talk, and I gave permission.
We did off podcast.
I gave permission to Pete to do obscene things to me after I'm dead. So we have an agreement, Pete and I, that is there. So don't get offended if you're at my funeral. And one of the guys that threw the word yesterday said when I got back, I texted him and he goes, "Oh, hey, you're not dead. Get back to work." And I wrote back, "When I die in a few months from cancer, I want that statement to haunt you." So welcome to the podcast. But it was funny because when I was getting ready to do it, I hear the nurse behind me going, "Scalpel." And I go, "Oh, doctor, is there going to be cutting today?" He looks over at me and goes, "Yes." And he starts to smile like he got it. And I go, "Oh, okay." Cause no one told me about that. It was pretty funny.
Awesome, man. That's
yes,
awesome.
I am even a punk in the doctor's office.
So we're on this medical share plan. It's not insurance, right? It's medical share. So the reason why we did that, for those of you who don't know what it is, like before Obamacare, we had great insurance.
Yep. Rest in peace. Me too. I remember it well.
As a self-employed person, I mean, it was like phenomenal. It was the best insurance. Then Obamacare comes in, and literally our prices went up from $500 a month to, I finally quit insurance at $1,100 a month, and like this huge deductible, huge copay. Like it was worthless. And I'm like, why am I spending all this money for nothing? Like I get nothing for this. So we switched to the to this medical share plan, which you guys probably hear about on Christian radio stations all the time, and it's not technically insurance. Like, it doesn't cover any prescriptions. It's pure medical stuff, and the way that it works is you get billed and you're considered self-pay. And so then you negotiate with the hospital, the doctor's office, whatever. Hey, I need a discount. Give me a cash discount. They'll all give you a cash discount. Like, they even have a little letter that you can give them that says, hey, you know what? Every one of our patients pays their bills. And we just ask that you don't treat them differently than you would treat someone on insurance. Because insurance, the whole reason why the prices are jacked up is because insurance cuts them all the way down.
Right. Yeah, of course. It's a scam.
Oh, it's totally a scam. So anyway, last September, my son goes in for emergency surgery. Hernia, he's got to have another one. So the bill was like, I don't know, like 40, 45 grand. Who knows what it was, right? From like all these different carriers, right? Like, when you get those bills, it's like, who the heck is this person who's, billing me for $500 and 700 over here and whatever, right? So I'm literally down to the last bill. And by the way, the medical share thing actually paid everything. Like, I was always like, is this thing legit? Like, I just didn't know, mainly because they market to Christians. And I'm like, any kind of Christian program, I'm like, I don't know if it's legit, because there's so much scamminess that goes on in the Christian arena. And so
that's because people are largely ignorant in that arena and trusting.
Yeah. I would say that's pretty accurate. So anyway, this one hospital, they give us a bill for like, I don't know, close to $3 grand. And so we negotiated a 20% discount. So I call them up because the medical share program gave me the 20% discount, the money for it. And so I call them up and they're like, oh yeah, well now there's new charges added to that bill. So we can't give you that 20% discount. We have to, we can only do it if you're paying off the whole bill. So now the whole bill is like just over $5 grand. And I go, okay, but you realize I got to submit this to the medical share plan. They're going to take their time to give me the money, and then I'll have the money. Yes, we understand. I go, so you don't want me to pay that bill, which I could pay right now, the old one, because, we had an agreement. No, we won't take it. I'm like, all right, you won't take the money. That's your choice. So finally get the money. I call them right before our podcast, right? And the lady's like, oh yeah, well, that's only if you're going to pay right away. It's been 5 months since then, so we can't take it. And I go, hey, look, here's the deal. You're either going to give me the discount, or you're going to send my bill to collections for pennies on the dollar, and they're going to give me a much bigger discount when I pay them. So I'm fine with either way. You either give me the discount or send it to collections, and the collections company will give me the discount. I'm cool with either way. I was like, this is stupid.
Yeah,
I will give you the $4 grand, whatever it was, like 20% off the $5,200 bill. I'll give that to you right now, or you get nothing, and you're going to sell it for pennies on the dollar. This doesn't even make any sense.
So collections people, you got to walk me through that, because I thought collections people are like, hey, you got to pay this now, we're going to ruin your credit. Is it pennies on the dollar? Like you say, I don't have it, and then they whittle it down? Or?
They buy it for usually pennies on the dollar. Like the first round, they might get it for 10 cents on the dollar. So they're going to tell you owe, the whole thing. But the reality is anything over 10 cents on the dollar, they're making profit. So they will cut a deal with you like nobody's business. And if you do it technically in the first 30 days, you won't have anything negative on your credit, because it actually, they have to send you, by law, they got to send you a letter and give you 30 days to dispute the debt. So if you do it in that first 30 days, you can take care of everything before it even goes on your credit.
Really?
Yeah.
That's kind of cool.
Not that I've ever played that game before.
Wow. Yeah, we need to talk after this call. I got a little situation with some doors that never arrived. And they started charging me because we were going to do finances. We had 2 orders with this company, and they billed me for the second. So I called the company up and said, hey, and they said, oh, we'll come down. And I said, well, you gotta call off your dogs, man, because you haven't delivered the doors yet. You delivered 1. I'm still waiting on the other 2. But they sent the whole thing to the financing department at the bank. So I got to go after that. So I might need to bow before your sensei and get some, because normally, man, I just fight everybody, you know. It's funny in those situations. I always tell them, I always go, you know, I'm a pretty nice guy. And, but I said, but there comes a time at which I flick a switch. I always threaten them that. And then I become a bulldog. And then they're always like, oh, okay. They usually hear me.
Time. There comes a time, though, when you just got to spit on your hands, raise the black flag, and slit throats.
No, normally I warn them, though. And for whatever reason, must be just because I'm nice, you know. But like the SDG&E guys that were out here ripping out telephone poles, they came around and they're like, yeah, you know, we're going to have to do this. And they were going to like chop out a piece of my front yard. And they said, you know, we're going to have to put a wheelchair access. I said, look, my daughter's handicapped. I get that. You know, I was good with everything. And they kept taking more and taking more. We're going to have to do this and we're going to have to do that. And we're going to have to wreck this front. You know, we have this really nice part outside of our garden. And then he said, you know, and I don't know where the roots to this tree are. And this after multiple conversations. And I said, you know, they go right under here. You're not going to cut into that, are you? And he goes, oh, we're not going to be able to avoid it. You know, we'll have to go down so far. I just looked at him and I go, there's like 3 or 4 people sitting there. I said, well, then I'm going to have to say no. And they all just kind of froze looking at me. And I go, look, that tree's 100 years old. You guys are cool. I'm cool. But nobody's chopping into that tree. I go, I dug out the conduit. I dug out the channel by hand to get around those roots to not hurt that tree a year and a half ago. And I said, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to fight you. Just let me know who I got to call. But you guys aren't touching that tree. And they just all stood back. A guy got on the phone. He called a big boss. That boss came down. That boss called another boss. They didn't move that telephone pole. So fight the power, baby. Literally. The power company, and I won. But it was just literally by telling them, no, I think I'm going to fight you. And they were just like, nah, screw it. We don't want to fight. So.
Yeah, that's why I was like, and the lady, she finally goes, oh, well, I can talk to my manager. I go, go ahead and do that. I go, I realize this isn't your fault. I'm just telling you, I don't really care either way. Go to collections or give me the discount here. Either way, I'm getting that discount.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. I mean, I think God puts that in us to a certain degree. He puts that fight in us. I remember reading something by John Eldridge.
Well, not only that, but it's total crap. Like
it's
this
corruption.
Is $5,000 for like I've already paid the hospital. Like their bill was $35,000, and I think they gave us, I want to say it was like a $17,000 discount. Like because it's all fake. These are all fake numbers they come up with. So don't tell me this is a legit $5,000 that I owe you. This is
so when I was in RN, I think I've told you this before. You know when you go into the hospital and they give you that little plastic like rectangular bucket to wash in, and then you get a little round one in there, and you get a little urinal in there, and it's wrapped in plastic. I remember when we were in nursing school, the nurse told us, she goes, look, let me tell you how insurance works. And she was instructing the class. She goes, and we were in a hospital, it was a live instruction in a facility, and she's pulling things out. And she goes, how much do you think insurance charges for this when you see it on the invoice? We're like, $5? You know, you could buy this thing at the swap meet for $2.
Right.
She goes, no, this is anywhere in between $250 to $300 on an insurance bill. This piece of plastic, she goes, now what you guys are going to do is you're going to come in here and you're going to understand when you throw that away, the person's insurance company gets charged $300 every time. So she's like, look, you need to start understanding the system. And, once you see it behind the scenes like that in the medical field, you're like, oh, like it costs $2.
Yeah.
To a consumer, not even to produce the thing. Thing wouldn't even cost $1 to produce.
Right.
So,
whenever you get someone else to pay the bill, that's why everything goes up. I mean, everyone's complaining about student loan debt. Dude, get government out of student loans. Then the schools can't keep charging students this absorbent fee that they charge.
Yeah.
Prices will come back down, and then you don't have to worry about student loan debt.
Yeah.
But whenever you get government involved, everything goes up. Everything. Not a single thing doesn't.
That was kind of what Reagan back when he said, "Stay out of my house, stay out of my morals, and stay out of my pocket." Those three things. Those are good rules. But I was going to say to you that
Reagan will always remain on my bad list.
Yeah, for what?
He got rid of automatic weapons. Post 1986, automatic weapons are not legal to buy in the United States, but you can still have an automatic weapon. You just have to have a pre-1986 one.
He also emptied many of the psychiatric hospitals, which raised the presence of homeless.
Yeah, but when he did that, they all ran as Democrats. So now we've got – oh, wait, sorry. I shouldn't have gone there.
Yes. So here's the thing. So I was going to ask you, Pete.
The things we think but do not say with Pete Mitchell.
So here's the thing, man. I need to ask you. There was something else I was going to say. Oh, John Eldredge. I did want to say this. John Eldredge wrote those books, Wild at Heart, and there are probably people make fun of him now because they were popular and it's easy to make fun. But he did some really valuable work. I mean, one of the things that he pointed out theologically, which I thought was great, is in Through the Word last week I did a whole study on anger. I read a book called Unoffendable, where the gentleman was posing that, or at least postulating that anger is never okay for human beings. And so, in my studying through the Word, I read his book and he made some compelling arguments to that effect. I mean, I was impressed with it, but he didn't convince me because hey, go listen to Through the Word, go listen to the anger study and you'll see why I unpack it. I don't think it's conclusive that humans can't get angry. But one of the things that John Eldredge really brought up in his book was that God made men to fight for a reason, to protect. And then people say, well, of course, that's after the fall. And John Eldredge says, no, before the fall, there was an enemy in the garden. Adam and Eve, Adam should have been ready to fight Satan. Like he put fight in us for a reason, right? Even Almighty God is a term which means God is a man of war. It's a war term. It means that God fights when he has to, So the whole idea of anger, of fighting, there is a time to fight. Even Ecclesiastes. And again, this book, Unoffendable, I mean, you guys can read it. It's definitely worth knowing about and definitely worth wrestling through his arguments. Again, I didn't come out with the same conclusion, but I'm always helped wrestling through these things. I think if you read things you disagree with, tends to really make you know why you believe what you believe. But anyways, I just throw that out there because here we are talking about fighting the power and this and that has a place. And I think God puts it in you, when you're fighting for your family, that is a good thing, Yeah,
it was really interesting yesterday. I won't go into the whole topic here because it would actually open up a huge can of worms. But I was watching a snippet of Joe Rogan's podcast. And Joe Rogan's an interesting guy. I mean, he's conservative in a lot of ways, and he's very liberal in a lot of ways. I mean, he's probably a typical American. He's right down the middle. He's got views on both sides. But it was he was specifically talking about the whole transgender in MMA sports. And he's like, look, I'm not talking about track and field. I'm not talking about basketball. I'm not talking about anything else. He goes, look, I've been doing MMA my entire life. He goes, it is not fair to take a guy who's been a guy for 30 years. And this is a true story, right? There's this guy who's transitioned to a girl and he's been on estrogen for 2 years and he fought these women and just destroyed them. Just literally destroyed them in the ring. Just one cracked her skull, everything. And they didn't know that they were fighting a chick who used to be a dude for 30 years. He's like, it's not even close to being fair when you look at bone density, when you look at 30 years of testosterone going through your body. You can't just all of a sudden say, oh, we've changed all that. Now he's a girl. He's like, no. And I'm just specifically talking about combat sports. Men are made different. is look at their hand size, look at their bone density.
Well, there's a reason that you have like weight classes for men and women.
Well, and he goes, and that's the only way, because he goes, genetically, some people are just genetically more gifted than others. And the only way we can even come close to being fair, and it's not really fair, he goes, is just to have weight classes. And he goes, but in combat sports, he goes, we cannot have, he goes, now if a woman wants to fight a transgender woman and she knows she's a transgender woman, that's her choice. He goes, I don't have a problem with that. What I have a problem is hiding the fact that you were a man for 30 years and you've got all that benefit of testosterone going through your body, the bone density, the physical size, muscle, all that, and not telling the women that you're beating. He goes, when you look at those fights, it's not like that the guy was, or the girl was, the transgender one was technically better. He goes, he was just striking her. Like, he just has more power behind him and can strike her. But that goes to your point of men are made different than women. And again, Joe Rogan's point was like, he's a very liberal guy, right? He doesn't have a problem with people who want to be transgender. He doesn't have a problem with transgender in other sports. He's like, look, the combat sports, this is something I've done my entire life. He goes, it's different here. You can't treat people the same way. They're made different. Men and women are made different.
Yeah, they are. And, there's complementary and even overlap. Like, he'll bring out, like, he and his wife wrote a book called Captivating, which
Joe Rogan
pretty
did?
Powerful. No, John Eldridge.
Okay.
And even in that, like, he talks in that, he says the fights in women too. I mean, Satan comes to Eve. She had some fight that she could have given as well. But it was really interesting just to wade through that. But funny enough, on the temptation side of things, I mean, you mentioned about people being genetically just enhanced for this thing, man, just born with, the right set of, hardware. I mean, Mike Tyson, when I was doing the Temptation series, I was talking about, I mentioned the greatest mistake people ever made with Mike Tyson was to get in the ring with him. I don't think people understand like what it was like for our generation to hear or to watch a Mike Tyson fight, where I started going through like his records. Like, I was trying to liken, like, sometimes temptation, like people feel like this particular temptation is like Mike Tyson. Like, I can't ever conquer it. It'd be like you step in the ring with that. And so you have to get past, and I mentioned like Rocky Balboa, that was the impossible, like this guy was just able to stand. And that's where Paul's like, just stand, Ephesians 6, just stand. And, he mentions the word stand. That's all you got to do is just like Rocky, until the bell dings, just stand for, and he mentions that word standing. He doesn't say beat the devil. He doesn't say fight. And with Mike Tyson, that's what it was. If you could stay in the ring with him for X amount of time, you'd wear him out and you could knock him out. But his record fights were like 20 seconds.
I remember.
Oh my gosh. And I was going through it first. It was like,
we were making fun of that in high school. We're like, that guy who was taken out in like the first 20 seconds. Yeah, give me my $10 million. I fought him. Give me my $10 million. That would be like the best per second pay rate ever.
Oh my gosh. It was just unreal reading. Cause at first, like, it was going in reverse order. And I'm like, 60 seconds. That's 40 seconds. What, 30 seconds, and then it was finally 20 seconds. You're like, dude, that's unreal. But anyways, hey, I wanted to ask you my Steve Irwin question, which is probably good because I was going to tell you like about my surgery a little more and tell you what they pulled out, but probably that's not a good place to go. But wouldn't it have been cool? Like when he was pulling me stuff, I asked to see it. So he's showing me as he's pulling it out. And, cause I'm morbid, I want to see it, and,
so if you could bronze it. Hey, do you mind if I bronze that one?
I tell you what, maybe I should tell you what I was going to tell you is, people keep asking me what it looked like. Do you want to know?
Well, I think you told me.
As a podcast. All I'm saying is Popeye's popcorn shrimp.
I was going to say, you said like Popeye's chicken or something, right?
Hey, that's not shrimp they're serving. I don't know. He's put it in a jar. I don't know where he's taking it. There could be a great market for this stuff. But anyways, I was going to say that, I was telling Barry, he's like, so what came out? And I started telling him things like, they're pulling out like gems and gold and stuff. And But wouldn't it be cool? Like, we should have a competition to find out the coolest thing they could have pulled out of Peyton. This is why we can't have nice things on this podcast. Because I was like, wouldn't it be cool if like they went in there?
If he would have had like some raw bacon and he'd be like, hey, look what I just pulled out.
Yeah. Like, wouldn't you want to do that? Like, if I were a surgeon, I'd want to have little like props that I go, hey, look at this, stick something in a jar. Like,
hey, did you miss your keys? Did you lose your keys somewhere?
I did just recently lose my keys. So that would be rad. But like, like little toys, like those little Norfin trolls with the big hair, like how did this get inside you? Come on. That would be awesome.
Hey, so I got to make a correction to our podcast from, I think, a couple of weeks ago. You mentioned Barry, and that's what made me think of it, because Barry is Welsh.
What would you say? Do you call him English?
Is he Welsh? Or is I know he
Welsh.
Speaks Welsh.
No, he's Welsh. He's Welshy Welsh.
He's Welshy Welsh?
Yeah.
Well, no, we were talking about the Crown TV show on Netflix.
Yeah.
And you had said, there's 2 episodes about Wales. And you're like, oh, did you see the one where he went to school? And I thought you were referring to the one when he went to school as a kid. And he said that was like the biggest hell of his life. And I think that was in Scotland. I don't think that was in Wales.
When he went to Aberystwyth and he's got to learn the Welsh language, and he gives that speech at the end. Oh,
no, because
so
I saw that one recently. I saw that one after the podcast. I was like, oh, this is the one he was talking about.
Oh, man.
I didn't want our UK friends to go, oh, the Prince of Wales thinks that, it was the greatest hell of his life was being in Wales. That wasn't what the episode said.
All right.
That was my bad. That was my bad. All I could think of was offending Barry.
Yeah, no, Barry's hard to offend. That's the best thing about him. But one of the things I told him they pulled out of me when he was asking was Muppets. So wouldn't that be rad? Just pull out like Muppets. Like if you're a surgeon, you just got the best opportunity to mess with people.
I would say they could probably pull out more, but due to cancel culture, maybe they just don't talk about it.
Yeah, maybe. But Pete, I know I told you I was going to drop this. I need to hear you answer this question. If you were a little snake and Steve Irwin found you in the desert, what would he say about you?
I have no idea.
This came from somebody tweeted this. One nice way to feel better about yourself is to imagine what Steve Irwin would say about you if you were a little snake and he found you in the desert. That is just solid gold, right?
Crikey, look at this little guy right here.
Oh, he's a right spitter. Yeah. Oh, it'd be so great, So you guys can
way to die, dude. Like the way he died.
Oh, dude, that's heartbreaking.
Out there for a swim and then you're dead. Like that quick.
Oh man, and it hit him repeatedly.
Oh, did it? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it went bam, 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 in succession. He didn't just get hit once. It was like a repeated lashing that punctured him in multiple places. So
I thought one of them got his heart, and that was the one that did it.
Yeah, that was it. So lightning fast. The guy said it happened so fast too. But yeah, got him right in the heart.
Man.
So, that was hard. There's just times you hear things like that and you're like, nah, that's to be one of those like Keanu Reeves died again, on the internet, or who's the guy they're always killing on the internet. And you always think, nah, that has to be a scam. Remember like they were killing people online a bunch, or like false reports of people's. I remember when I first heard that, I was like, nah, there's no way that's real, but yeah, it was a sad one, man. He was quite a loss. Same with Robin Williams when he died.
What do you think Tiger Woods was doing with his car accident?
I've chosen not to know, Pete. There's just some things you just don't want to know.
I was like, what? How fast was he going?
Well, he's probably got quite a nice car. He might want to open it up on the road sometimes. I'm just saying. But
it was like one of those mini SUVs. I'm like, who does that in that car?
Oh, really? Yeah.
Not like he was at a Charger. I mean, he was
I remember
Hyundai.
I remember years ago hearing about him because he was married to a supermodel. He was like one of the world's greatest sports superstars. And I remember when I had planted in Wales, I remember because we were reaching a lot of lost people and a lot of unchurched, unsaved people were coming into this Christmas thing. And I had this sermon where I was talking about, I don't remember what it was. It was about Jesus being a liberator, that I think it was, he shall save them from their sins. You shall call him, his name shall be Jesus, for he will save, which is the Lord saves, for he shall save people from their sins. And I just remember using, it's like, everything in life is going well, and we strap, this is a terrible illustration, but we strap, C4 and a bunch of stuff, and we just detonate our lives, because people at that time were like, but Tiger Woods, he had everything, right? But it's our own sins, it's our own passions, that when we have everything, like we have good lives, but then it's not enough. We want more. And so we do these things. Our sins just detonate. We need saving from our sins. And I remember using his circumstances as an illustration of a guy who had everything, but still needed saving, from himself, really,
I found that to be one of the best episodes of The Crown, was when the Prince of Wales, he lets that priest start a retreat there in one of their unused buildings.
Yeah.
And they're all have a midlife crisis, right? And he's
the Duke of Edinburgh. You're thinking the Duke of Edinburgh, right?
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Duke of Edinburgh. Sorry. Yeah. Hey, come on. I'm not English.
But I love that you're watching The Crown. I never saw Pete Mitchell watching The Crown.
One out of shows to watch. Like I said, we finished Dexter.
Obviously.
And then it's like, what do we do now? It's The Crown.
Crown is so good. That and Last Kingdom are the two best shows on TV.
I don't know what that one is. What is that?
That's with the guy who he's a Saxon who's raised as a Dane in King Alfred's England, where England barely exists. Every other part of England's been conquered by the Danes, by the Vikings. And Alfred is a guy who has this dream of a united England with all these kingdoms. So he's in Wessex, and they're just the bottom of the country, just barely holding on. And he gets a hold of this guy. It's a true story. And is it Bernard Cornwell? I don't remember that. I've never read the guy's books, but he wrote a series of historic fiction novels about him. But Uchard of Bebenberg is the guy's name, and he's a true historic figure. And Alfred just kind of harnesses him and uses him to take back England. And it's a fantastic show.
Yeah, I know. All I was going to say about the other point with the seminary and the midlife crisis, here you got Prince Philip, who in some respects has literally everything. What does he have to do?
Right.
Think about how hard his life is not. And yet he's totally unfulfilled. He's
a man of leisure. That's undoubtedly put forward in the Queen. She has a hard life. The Queen has a hard life. This show brings that out.
I was telling Jamie, I go, look, if you were Queen, I would just be like, sweet, I'm going to go shooting every day. Because they got
That's what he was doing.
That's all
and other things.
Do. Yeah, no, but I find it interesting that we all seem to have that. Not be
he really, it's really a Bible study that he joins. There's a really cool Christian influence in this show. The Billy Graham episode was pretty powerful. So
yeah.
So hey, getting into today's topic.
Great. It's time for this week's topic.
Let's get down to the nitty gritty. So I don't know why Pete and I still do that. It's just part of what it is. But hey, wanted to have the chat. I threw out on Facebook a couple weeks ago, what are your burning church planning questions? And besides the fact that our audience are a bunch of punks and they all made jokes about the fact that I used the word burning. And I remember commenting on there leave it to our audience to punk this question. That's great. That's what I love about our audience. But one of the first question on there was, hey, it was left there by Vinny Hankey. He said, hey, is the idea of raising up a church planner within, is it a myth or is it a legend? Is it a reality or not? So I want to talk about that. And, I'll start off right off the bat saying, yes, it is a reality. You should be raising up from within. But raising up from within does not mean that they plant in your locale. And that's the thing that I think he was asking. Do you grab people from afar? Do you need to recruit them from outside, or do you raise them up? Well, the answer is both, because you might raise someone up from within who ends up going off and planting, on the other side of the country. But was it in vain that you raised them up? No. You get to raise them up, but it may not be in your locale, in your immediate jurisdiction. So if I'm a Jerusalem, let's say, and I'm a Jerusalem hub, they may not plant out in Judea. They may not plant out in Samaria. They may go to the ends of the earth, but that's still part of the call, is that I'm meant to disciple and to raise and to send. But I think that the question really is, how? I think what he was really asking is how. How do you do it, and how do you do it well? So let me unpack some of that. I lead a network. I call it a network. It's not a network. Like, New Breed is not a network that's like other networks. We would say we're a super network. We're a network of people from other networks, because what New Breed tends to do is it tends to supply what a lot of networks lack, which is resource and relationships. So we do things like this Friday. This podcast already have aired, but we'll be interviewing. I'll be doing a webinar with Ralph Moore. And afterwards, the guys in my network, we get to like some private time with him afterwards. We go into a little group room, we interact with him. But, for us, we're always doing coaching and training. And like NAM does that. But I would say ours is, how do you put it? It's a little more in real time. We're small. We're not big. We're apostolic. I don't, my goal is not to be the biggest, baddest thing.
Be clear for everyone who doesn't understand what you're talking about. You're talking about New Breed.
Yeah, New Breed.
Your guys, you're talking about guys who are in the New Breed network.
Right. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. Because, and this is where I'm going. To answer that question, we have a pathway that when you come to New Breed, we're going to train you. Then we're going to train you to train your team. Then we're going to train you to train others to plant churches. So there's a progression, which means there's 3 assessments. There's the assessment of whether or not you're called. There's an assessment of missional engagement. And then the third one is we're going to assess you whether or not you're ready to train others, right? And send them out. So that's kind of our DNA. Our DNA is eventually we want you to be a hub that's sending, raising up, and sending out. So to answer that question today, yes, but many people are lacking a pathway. They don't know how to train others to train. Now, because I build curriculums, I'm actually halfway through a curriculum called Citywide, which is literally how to raise up and deploy planters out of a particular city. And one of the key things that we would train people to do is to work with other churches and come together and deploy people that way. So that if you're a smaller church, you don't necessarily need to take the entire burden off of planning another church in your city. You could partner with a Baptist, a Presbyterian, an Anglican. And what we try to train people to do is to plan around APES teams so that it's not one dude going out there. He doesn't need $100,000, doesn't need to be set apart full time. Our thing is APES teams, bivocational. And so our whole DNA from start to finish is this model, which if you've been listening to this podcast or anything Pete and I have been saying over the years, this is what we talk about. This is what we live. This is what we breathe. When Pete and I were in a church plant together, this is what I was doing, So yeah, that's kind of it. But how to train people up. It's a deeper thing. So, and Pete, interrupt at any time because you know how I get. I start working.
Let me start it off by asking this question because I have personal issues with with the concept of an assessment. So explain me what the assessment is and why do you find those important?
So the assessment that we do would be more like an interview. I need to hear and understand. I can't tell anybody whether or not they're called to plant a church. And you and I have talked about this before, where you're like, nobody can tell you that. True. Nobody can tell. Like if you came to me and said, Peyton, I'm going to plant a church, probably the last thing I'm going to ever do is discourage your calling. What my assessment for is calling and character. I want to see, do you have not just, I'm going to help you explore your calling, right? I can't give you a pass or fail on that, but I'm going to help you explore. So for example, if a couple comes through and their marriage is falling apart, that's a character issue. And I don't attack their calling. I say, look, your marriage will get destroyed if you do this, and God cares more about you than anything you can do for him. So I'm going to give you a recommendation, and that is strengthen your marriage. Here are the things I would say, and come back to me in 6 months. Come back to me in a year, or, we're not seeking the Lord together. I'm like, okay, hold on. You need to do all that. So I've got a couple right now that's come through, and I'll be having a chat with them to give them some recommendations, and then say, come back to me. And then let's talk. So I don't tend to discourage people from being called. In fact, it's really interesting because for me, it's more about position. That first assessment, I just hands down, I think everybody is called to be a part of a church plant at least once in their Christianity. I think if you go through your journey on earth and you have not once been a part of a church plant, you blew a huge opportunity of experiencing some pretty rad things on mission. It's kind of like the Mormons. The Mormons are like, hey, should we go on mission? That's never debatable. They're like, everybody needs to go for 2 years. I hold a very similar view that we are an expanding kingdom movement. You ought to be a part of kingdom expansion. That's what Christianity is. So because of that, when you come to me, like there was a guy who came to this thing we ran called Train Station, which was citywide in the making. This guy came back and he's like, hey, I want to go through, and he had all these addiction issues. And so I said, hey, man, you're in a good place. Hey, you're talking about it. You're in recovery groups. You're here. But I knew that I had early on, I had a guy where when I assessed him in New Breed, I failed to ask him, have you ever been addicted to substances? And one day he turned up and or he didn't turn up, and all the church equipment was gone.
I remember he'd sold it all.
Do you remember?
Yes.
And he was in a crack house. Now, his ministry was flipping crack houses into church plants, which was rad. Totally honored to have him. But I never thought back then. Now, go figure. I was a recovery nurse. But I never asked him, hey, by the way, this is a rad ministry. Have you ever been addicted to crack? Like, hello. Like, that was a no-brainer. But back then, I was naive. I didn't know. Like, dude's going into that. I'm thinking, he's got systems in place. So that first assessment is, I want to hear your calling. And what I really want to hear is your burden. I know that you assess guys that come through your program. We'll assess people in the network. Our golden rule of thumb was always, if they don't want to reach the lost, that's not their passion and burden, we're probably not the network for them, because all of our training is geared towards that. So that would be the first one. So,
and honestly, that makes a lot of sense to me, because, one of the things that we used to always say is, I don't believe they've invented a test yet that can judge the true heart of a man or a woman.
So true. And again, if that guy wasn't, like I said, he had addiction issues. I told him, I don't think you're ready to lead yet until you got, some time under your belt of sobriety and recovery. And then I think you're good to go. But go serve on, we had 15 planners in the room. I'm like, you partner with him, apprentice under him. You're not going to get paid. You're not going to be in charge. You're not going to be this, but you go learn from that dude. And so we would pair people up. It was never you're not called to this. It was, you're just not ready to do what you think you're ready to do, but definitely be on that journey and apprentice like a Timothy under this Paul here. Then to move on from there, our second assessment was your church is up and running. Let's assess your missional engagement. And so that's something I can speak into. I can help you with that. And then the third one is your multiplication assessment. Are you ready to multiply? And I would say the answer that we frequently find is no, you're never ready to multiply. You never feel ready to, but you're always ready to multiply. But are you ready to train others yet to plant? And that to me is because I value the planners. I would never put a dude, make a guy a drill sergeant who had never been in combat. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I always feel like for that, like I'm always super jealous over those planning trainers because you can really mess a dude up. Or I say dude, I mean this like, male, female. I don't train females. I train males because I'm a male, but Andrew will help train the females. And again, that might sound archaic. I am egalitarian on that. I believe that when God calls you in ministry, he calls couples, but I don't like to disciple females. That's just a personal protection, especially in the light of all the stuff that we talked about last week. But that said, going back to that, so the key is, this is how it works for me. When I first went into Refuge Long Beach, I still very much had in my mind, this is what a church planner looks like. And I chose the people out of a list. I chose Ruben, I chose Mike, I chose Jimbo, I chose Charlie. These were the guys I was going to train, right? So as I moved into that, those were my church planner trainees. And I made the statement back then, I'm really, my first church plan is in it to reach lost. This one, I'm in it to train others to reach the lost. I'm in it to train church planners. And that's really why I'm here. The lost will get reached because I'm going to train these guys to do it. But the reality is I went about it wrong. I was going about it like trying to find, this is the person, kind of like when Samuel walks up to the household of Jesse and he sees the oldest, David's oldest brother, and he goes, surely this is the man the Lord has chosen. And it says, and God says, you're looking at the outward appearance and God looks on the heart. And it's not till later when David, and he goes, don't you have any more sons? Because God's not speaking to me here. And they go, oh, we do have one. He's out in the fields. He goes, well, call him. David comes and the Lord's like, boom. And it says, God looks at the heart. So it's not, I learned it's not the people that you think. And go into it, case in point would be Steve Ortiz, who you would know, right? Yeah. Who, when he came to that church plant, man, no one would ever think that dude would be. Now he's on the leadership team. He's the most solid dude on the leadership team of Refuge Long Beach. And now that Refuge has merged with another church, another few churches actually, there's a group that's now made their way over to the park to still continue on mission there. And we have no idea what's going to happen there, but Steve is there. And
which parks, by the way?
They're back in Revolution again.
Okay.
Or no, not Recreation Park. And they're calling the mission remnant because they're like, we're not a church plant. We're just a mission. We're going to keep doing this mission. And there's some cool things I could tell you behind the scenes afterwards that would get you kind of excited. But one of the cool things is that it was through watching what God was doing in Refuge Long Beach that I realized once you activate the average believer, you just got to wait and see what happens. The people you think are going to be the church planners aren't going to be the church planners. And I learned that. It was the people like Steve that when his gifts got activated, he became a whole nother dude. I'm like, oh. And so when I look back on Jesus, I see Jesus raising up the 12 who had zero ministry potential. Peter, come on, right? These guys, if you looked at them, and I realized that was the point, that what Jesus was modeling was, I'm just going to disciple the people in front of me really well, and leadership will emerge. So, he goes aside and prays overnight before he chooses the 12, but he had already been discipling prior to that. And I used to scratch my head at that, like, but they were already following him. If you read the chronological Bible, you see that all these things happen before he chooses the 12. He's traveling with this bigger group of people. And he's got to choose. He's got to narrow it down to 12 for each of the tribes of Israel. It was a very strategic number. And of course, they were going to primarily minister to Israel for 10 something years till Paul, ends up going to the Gentiles and Simon has his vision. The first 10 years were just Israel. So Jesus picks them. They're kind of the epicenter, but Jesus modeled for us that you just disciple the people in front of you and the gifts emerge, right? That's where John and Peter and James, they became the three pillars that Paul later says, I perceived those three were pillars. So as you look at that, it becomes pretty powerful to see that the key to raising people up from within, or planters from within, is just raise everyone up from within. And there were different ways that we did that. So does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
It's not raising planters. It's just raising gift activated believers, and then forming the teams of people as you multiply outwards. There's multiple ways to do that, but the way that I found, and this is so funny because this got cut out of the textbook. Remember, I wrote 2 textbooks on accident, 2 400-page textbooks, and one of the chapters I had to sacrifice, and I did it strategically, was the one on what people would call micro churches or cogs, because I'm like, well, Brian Sanders wrote his thing. We called them cogs, but they were micro churches. A micro church is a small grouping of people that's held together by mission. And you'll remember that's what we said our cogs are based around mission. Sunday's mission, but also these small groups are mission. So we called them missional cogs, where every other week you'd be in some kind of mission, and the week off you'd be in some kind of Bible study. But we like that rhythm back and forth. Sanders are just out on mission, and then they're back to the main hub, which works. Sanders' model was genius, and I love Brian. So everything he writes on that is gold. Learn from him. It's great. We did the same thing both in Wales and in Long Beach, where mission was your primary driver for this grouping of people. But when I approach it, like let's say I took Reuben, I apprenticed Reuben, Bonomo, and Jimbo. Reuben, because he was the newest. Jimbo had more experience. I went to Jimbo's meeting and helped him kick it off for 8 weeks. At the same time, I was running one at the Rampy's house with Reuben. And Reuben was my shadow. I told Jimbo shadow. So he had, I can't remember his name, it's terrible. But Jimbo was shadowing his best friend. I can't remember his name. But he's married to Savannah, if you remember. So he was discipling him. And what I was saying was, reproduce yourself. You're going to plant out another one of these, but I wasn't telling them it was a church plant. But what our missional cogs were really was core teams. They seemed like small groups, but they were actually core team incubators. So when Reuben came to mine, he shadowed me for 8 weeks. Then he started one, right? I actually handed that off to him, and then he started another one. When he ran that one in Long Beach at DJ's house, that became the San Pedro core team. And what I would do, so in other words, these groups were incubators for core teams. And I would tell Reuben, this is going to be your core team, right? Eventually. And I said, but you can't tell them that. I was constantly from the front giving the message, you're not going to be here in a few years. You're not going to be here in a few years. You're going to be somewhere else doing something else. I know you don't believe me, but I had the systems and structure in place to make that a thing while I was there. So that's why we sent Jimbo out. That's why we sent Reuben out. That's why we were sending other people out. We never sent Mike out. We kind of thought that Mike could be the guy that stayed. But we were literally hardwiring into it core teams that would plant out, if that makes sense. So, and as they would kind of disciple those people over the years, they would form a strong bond as a team. They would be on mission and in ministry together. And then eventually they would be a church plant, if that makes sense. And that was kind of the system I put in place. The problem is I left. I couldn't keep that going. And if I look back on that church plant, I kind of think to myself, what I should have done as I left it was to ensure that I had reproduced. I would say I was reproducing a bunch of church planners, but I didn't reproduce myself. I can make church planners, but I needed
because I'd say that the person who essentially replaced you, that's not his DNA.
Right.
Which is not to say, I mean, because A+ guy, A+.
Yeah. Oh,
awesome.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but that's not his DNA.
Yeah, and I should have reproduced a Peyton, a guy who was like, hey, I'm just going to stay here, and I'm just going to reproduce apostles. You know,
how do you do that? How do you reproduce yourself like that?
I'm still trying to figure that question out, brother.
Isn't that kind of like, some people are just built certain ways and others aren't? Like, I would honestly look at that and say the closest is probably Reuben out of that.
It is. Reuben developed into an apostolic leader. And if I look back in hindsight, because I was focused on sending Reuben out, which Reuben did go out. The interesting thing is I was trying to get him to do all the church planning stuff that he eventually was like, he wouldn't do any of it. So I'm like, okay, but he came back. And when he came back, I literally said to him, I think you're the apostolic guy who's meant to stay on this team and stay here. And Reuben acknowledged that. And to this day, Reuben's still a part of that merger and that next iteration of Refuge that's going on. But, and of course it's merged with another church, but he'll bring that apostolic dynamic, which he did as he came back. But I would have trained Reuben to stay and send rather than to go. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so if I could go back and do it differently.
Well, I don't know, but I think it's good though that he went, because then he's like, okay, I've been there, I've done that. Now let me come back and send.
Well, what's great is that Reuben actually started off taking his cog on mission in the park on Sunday afternoons. He when he first started, it wasn't a church,
and people
plan. It was a mission.
Still go on mission I don't know if it's Saturday or Sunday. They're always going to the bluffs there in Long Beach. And
oh man, that was another cog. So those cogs became like choose your own adventure, choose your own mission. And that's what we wanted, was people to just own something. So these guys, that bluff in Long Beach, right downtown, is everybody meets up for different things, drugs, yoga, you name it. So, but our group would go up there and pray. And that became one of the real powerhouses of Refuge Long Beach. And they'd share the gospel, but they primarily prayed. And that became, and I remember DJ, who was just a leader without ever wanting to be a leader. And, we used to call that the unofficial secret cog. We're like, he's a leader, just don't tell him. We had a cog that met in the park with the homeless people. One of the homeless guys led it, Alex. So, I mean, there was all kinds of cool stuff going on. But yeah, that, to me, that's the secret. So yes, but if you do it like I did it, where you identify that's a church planner and I'm going to train that guy, you're doing it wrong. You need to kind of take more of a back seat and let the Holy Spirit lead on that and watch what emerges as you disciple really well. So
how do you take care of all your IRS compliance and your bank statements and, do all the financial stuff of running your church while you're training all these guys to be church?
If you didn't do that just then, I was going to. So, Pete, it's really interesting because what I learned to do was contact simplifiedchurch.com and get them to handle all of my bookkeeping, my IRS compliance, my payroll services. And they took care of that like a charm for me, Pete. So I could keep multiplying and raising up planners from within.
Love it. I love it. So that was simplifiedchurch.com?
That's right, Pete. Simplifiedchurch.com, and tell them Peyton and Pete sent you. Cool. Well, hey guys, thanks for joining us. And if you have a rough week, just imagine what Steve Irwin would say to Pete Mitchell if you're a little snake found in the desert. And you'll feel better about yourself and Pete. And we want to thank you today for joining us for this very loud edition of the Church Planner Podcast. And we want to remind you as well that if you want to reach ones no one's reaching, I butchered this, you need to go where nobody's going and do what nobody's doing. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks for joining us for another weekly episode of the Church Planner Podcast with Pete Mitchell and Peyton Jones. We'd love to hear your comments on this episode of the Church Planner Podcast. Visit us online and let us know what you thought at churchplannerpodcast.com. If you subscribe to us via iTunes and have enjoyed the podcast, leave us a positive review. The more positive reviews we receive in iTunes, the more iTunes will promote us to other church planners who would benefit from this show. This podcast is brought to you by the Church Planner Magazine, which is available in the iTunes newsstand or online via churchplannermagazine.com.